Right.
Sounds
Hi
good.
there, everybody, and welcome to Awaken Your Highest Self. And we've got the pleasure of having a very talented gentleman called Adam Hardyman with us today. Um, I know Adam as somebody whose music I've bought or discovered via YouTube. He's got an amazing YouTube channel where he shows how he creates music on his iPad. Amazing kind of electronic kind of sound creations, in my opinion. But Adam shows you the process of what he's doing. And he's got two albums on Bandcamp, which you can find out about here. I'm a DJ and musician, somebody into the power of sound, manifestation, healing. Very intrigued and excited by this interview because when I got in touch with Adam, I suddenly found out that there's even more talents to Adam than his music making. So we're going to find out loads about that. But yeah, hi Adam, how are you doing?
Hi, Graham. Good. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
been interesting knowing that someone was going to interview me and how it's been focusing my mind just kind of, what is it I want to talk about and what do I think about stuff? That's it's been good. It's already been healing for me just knowing that someone's going to ask me some questions.
Yeah, how exciting. And it was very exciting because I noticed your YouTube channel had been a little bit quiet with your iOS videos. And I was like, oh, I hope Adam's okay because, I have been quite often I will dip in and listen to your LPs when I'm chilling out. And it's very, just for people to understand, if you're into electronic music, Adam's like, in my head, a really explorative sound design kind of creative person. He clearly is in touch with his creative inner self, and his creative child is very playful, but it also looks like he's perhaps a deeply analytical person who might understand sound in lots of different ways. So, and when I kind of emailed him, there's loads of other dimensions to Adam that sound equally fascinating as well. So, yeah, do check out his Bandcamp and his YouTube page just to see what I'm going on about. I think if you like electronic music, you will be very impressed. But Adam, you're also a homeopath and a
Yes.
bioresonance practitioner.
Yes.
Would you like care to explain what those are to people, lay people who might not know about that side of things?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start by talking about my dad, who's the main influence here. So my father was a homeopath and a radionic practitioner. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that might be. So I grew up with a father that was interested in healing. He was a dowser.
Mhm.
I know you're interested in dowsing, and I've seen one of your videos about dowsing with the here on your channel. So I grew up with a father that's a dowser and a healer and a homeopath and a radionic practitioner who, for a young child, having a father that would be sending healing around the world with radionic machines was quite profound. It's quite
Wow.
a fascinating way to grow up, to have that as a father. But he was also a musician. So his days would be music at night. He'd go out and gig as a pianist.
Mhm.
He met my mum because my mum was a singer. So they're a musical family. But as I was growing up, they'd be gigging in the evenings and in the daytime or in the early afternoons, he'd be seeing clients as a homeopath and a vibrational medicine practitioner, shall we say.
Yeah.
So I grew up with all this stuff. And eventually, after, well, my youth was, I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be a musician, like a lot of kids and playing guitars and being in bands and wanting to be the eternal rock star. But eventually I realized that that wasn't going to be a career path for me. So I started getting into what dad was doing, training as a homeopath and learning the trade. So I did my training as a homeopath. Homeopathy is for those that don't, well, it's a very popular alternative medicine. So it's a system of healing using medicine or small doses of medicine, very natural, um, energetic, vibrational medicine rather than biological medicine. So I trained in that, but soon realized that what I really was interested in was vibrational medicine. I've used that term a few times now, but vibrational medicine. And that led to me studying, to cut a long story short, bioresonance therapy, which is a system of its machines. It's nice machines, which ironically have a similarity to some of the machines I now use with my music. But the bioresonance machines are frequency devices. So you're using machines to heal, I would be in inverted commas there, using frequencies. People might be more familiar with Rife machines, which was the predecessor to bioresonance machines. Do you have any experience with Rife machines, Graham?
I don't have any experience with them. I've got the name in the background as a reference point, but I don't know anything. So if you wanted to explain that, please do.
Yeah, so when we get into all things frequency, medicine, healing, vibrational, the machine side of it started with a guy called Royal Raymond Rife. And he was famous for creating a frequency machine which could heal certain conditions. He famously cured cancer in a small subset of people using his machines. And he had this amazing microscope that he built. And this microscope enabled him to see the microbes that he was trying to treat. So he could see viruses and bacteria in this with this microscope that he created. And with his machines, he could tune into the resonant frequency of the microbes that you wanted to kill and shatter them. So at specific frequencies, look at the microbe you want to kill, or yeah, kill, I suppose is the right word. And through fine-tuning the frequency on the machine, he could shatter these microbes.
Ah,
And by doing that, he cured certain diseases in people by being able to get rid of their, the microbial load, their viruses and bacteria, purely with frequency. So you're finding the resonant frequency using this machine. So that was very interesting. Like a lot of these kind of people, it all went a bit wrong, and he got in trouble. And later in life, you know what it's like when you do these kind of amazing new therapies. Sometimes they're not well received, and his life has became very interesting after that, and it never really went anywhere. And it's a story of alcoholism and problems after that. Very interesting life story, rife therapy. But that kind of led to the idea of bioresonance therapy, which is what I do now. Bioresonance machines are kind of the next development of that, using frequencies, but kind of rather than having this amazing microscope and being able to find the frequencies that you want to treat, with bioresonance, you're using your own information. So a bioresonance machine will read your own energetic situation and try and correct any imbalances it finds within your own frequencies, shall we say, rather than just using a machine to kill a specific virus. The bioresonance machine, because we don't have these microscopes anymore that enable us to see the microbes. That's very difficult to do. So they think, well, okay, well, what can we do now rather than using this idea of the Rife therapy? We use our own information. Is that the right word? And then the bioresonance machines will try and correct that information and send it back to you corrected.
ah,
So true bioresonance therapy is your information goes into the machine tries to correct that information or rebalance it and send it back to you rebalanced
okay,
using magnets and other devices.
okay.
I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but that's kind of the route from Rife therapy, which is very interesting, difficult to do now because we can't see the viruses very easily. So then, okay, well, if we can't use specific frequencies that in that way, can we use our own frequencies and treat those instead? And it's a different idea. So that's a quick explanation of bioresonance, true bioresonance therapy. Bioresonance therapy now is used in lots of different ways. There's lots of different bioresonance machines now that do all sorts of weird and wonderful things, but that's true bioresonance therapy. Your
Ah,
information corrected, sent back to you corrected.
okay.
So that's what I do for a living now. That's what I got into that through my dad, and my dad was a radionics practitioner, which is a whole different
Right.
form of healing, which is more healing from a distance. So, he has these boxes. I don't know if I've got, there's an old radionics machine here.
Right.
Again, looks a little bit like a
Yeah.
kind of a synthesizer kind of thing, which is kind of the irony of what I'm doing now is this,
Yeah.
how these machines mimic the musical machines that I use.
Hmm.
Um, and radionics, I mean, that's a difficult one to explain, but it's tuning into, I suppose, the field in some way and sending healing via a distance.
Yeah.
So he would have patients all over the world, and they would send some kind of witness for him to use, like a hair sample or a blood spot or a photograph. And using that as a witness, he would send
Yeah.
vibrational healing to them
Yeah. Yeah.
using these. old-fashioned radio wave machines. I think they're more based on radio waves than
Yeah.
the idea back in the day. So radionics, yeah, it's a whole nother topic of conversation, but
Yeah.
that's my father's thing, which I kind of, again, in thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, I've kind of got some of the old machines out, the old radionics machines that were gathering dust, and just thinking about, okay, maybe I'll start using them again. I've got some of his old machines lying around.
Yeah, well, that, I think like you perhaps picked up on my experience of radionics was this kind of Tesla coil that I purchased from somebody. It's by Kelly Research Technologies, and purchased this at a detox fair.
Yeah,
It was last year. Didn't quite know exactly what it did, and it's sitting around the house for a little while. And in 2020, when I was knocked off my bike by a car in a road traffic accident and sustained nerve damage on my foot, and then one night it just popped into me, oh, why don't I just tape this to my ankle overnight? No, had no points of reference. I hadn't even looked at the company's website at that stage, and the next morning, the amount of sensation that had returned to my foot, I was just taken aback. I was out walking with my son and going, I can feel the bottom of my foot again. I was like, and yeah, so I was just like, wow, finding the company, emailing the company, going, what's going on here? What is this? And so I've started to glimpse into some of the world of radionics. This company, Kelly Research Technologies, has got some amazing download resources about. I think they're fairly pioneers in their kind of field.
yeah,
Uh, Admittedly, with some scientific technical stuff, I sometimes glaze over because it's not really my natural kind of thing. But yeah, certainly it's something I'm very intrigued by and totally into working with the quantum field. As an individual, I think we are all beautifully connected in loads of ways that we don't understand through conventional thinking. And
indeed.
yeah, yeah. So it's fascinating to hear that, and it's great to hear how rich a kind of background that your father brought into your life,
Mm.
an influence that you've taken forward as well. So yeah, that sounds
Yeah, very lucky to have a father like that and
yeah,
to grow up with that kind of things. And I think looking at the device you have there, radionics, like bioresonance, has probably been expanded over the years and now
yeah,
encompasses many different ideas
yeah,
of vibrational healing. And I'm not quite sure what that device does, but
yeah.
it is a fascinating, growing area. And yeah,
Well, as I
so
understand it, it pumps out a sort of vortex of energy that magnifies manifestations, and it it just it must have been doing something powerful to my ankle
yes, indeed.
to kind of make that change just overnight by sleeping with it. So I will frequently, every so often, kind of revisit that and redo it again. And I have it next to my water. It raises the life force energy of the water
Mm.
the filter. So there's numerous applications that I think you can be very creative with. I think is the brief basically, but
Yeah, I think, like you say, when you get to these things, the mind kind of kicks in, and I do have a very analytical part of my mind which likes to understand how these things work.
okay.
And it is tricky, but it is good to try and understand, to try and have a little think about what's actually going on when we're doing this kind of thing. What is healing? What is your involvement with the healing? Is healing happening to you through this thing, or is there an interplay between you and the thing? And these are the kind of questions I like to answer, and it
Yeah,
also helps me to understand what's happening with music. That's the connection as well when you
yeah,
think of music as healing as well.
sure.
And this is kind of the thread that I'm into at the moment, is trying to understand the connection between what I do with the bioresonance.
Yeah,
We've talked a little bit about frequencies and energies and
yeah.
how that can then translate to music, and what sound healing is. Have you ever had a sound healing or sound bath or done
Yeah,
that kind of thing?
yeah, I'm quite a fan of gong baths and sound healing. I've got some Tibetan singing bowls that I quite regularly will just sit and ground in nature barefoot with my singing bowls and tune into things like that. I've got a couple of tuning forks, a bit like the forks that you've got in the background that I bought from somebody
Mm.
Jonathan Goldman that I use
Yeah,
on a daily basis. So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I suppose I'm partly analytical. I do like technology in that I've kind of grown up. I can remember the very first time I heard electronic music on the radio in the back of a car, going on a journey, going, "Oh wow, Mum, you got to turn that up." There's suddenly this record, and I was like, "There's something sonically about this that I needed to know about." And so I've spent many years getting into synthesized sound, exploring, but then also then realizing, well, there's some pros and cons to it that as well. So I'm curious about relationships with technology. Nowadays we have an era where really highly phone addicted people, mobile phones, that's really dominating a lot of people's lives a little bit too much, I would think. And so there's also this relationship about the mind, body, and spirit that I'm really interested in exploring, because that's very powerful. So I'm just to share, I'm a very curious question person. I'm always the kid at the back of the class asking the awkward question that the teacher hasn't
good.
pointed to. And so,
Mm,
yeah,
good.
sometimes with computer technology and the idea that computers can know what's right for us,
Mm,
or can correct us, I'm sometimes, a little bit question marky, going, well, actually, yeah, computers and technology can have strengths and weaknesses, can't they? And I think it's trying to figure out the relationship that you might choose to have with them, and
mm,
also the relationship you might develop with your mind, body, and spirit, because that's a very powerful thing that you can't really necessarily analyze or get quantifiable proof, but it's really powerful, that mind, body, spirit relationship as well.
yeah.
So I think there's
I was
interesting dimensions in that.
listening to a guy called Alexander Tanous, who's a sound therapist, and he makes an interesting point that he would call it, rather than sound therapy, he calls it sound meditation.
Right.
And he thinks this is an important point because the idea of therapy is that you sit in a sound bath and that the therapy is happening to you.
Yeah.
I am receiving healing. But certainly when we start talking about music, the idea of a meditation would be that this is an interactive process. You bring something to the healing,
Yeah. Yeah.
your own concentration, your own intentions, your own emotions.
Yeah.
And then the music or the sound is then facilitating something within you. So
Yeah.
it's a two-way process, which I resonate with, to use that word.
Yeah.
Um, so recently I had the pleasure of being given a load of sound healing tools. So one of my clients who's a sound healer was moving house. So they said, do you want to look after all our gongs and bowls and everything? So I thought, okay. So for quite a few months, I had like these massive gongs and bowls and singing bowls. And I was like, okay. So just started playing with all these tools.
Oh, hello.
And it was fascinating. And fascinating in that, I think it helped me to try and understand this question which I have, which is what is sound healing? What is so good about music? Why is music so healing? And why is music so powerful?
Yeah.
And I've not come up with a definitive answer, but it's certainly an interesting exploration into sound, maybe frequencies again. We talk about bowls having certain frequencies, certain singing bowls, and what's the other one? Singing bowls and crystal bowls.
Yeah.
So the crystal bowl will have a very fundamental frequency, say 428 or 528 or something, whereas a gong will have lots of different frequencies involved. And so it gets to this question of are there specific frequencies which are healing? So I've heard lots of people talk about this idea of 528
Yeah.
being the frequency of God or
Mhm.
an important frequency, which I struggle with, if I'm honest, because I think it's probably much more complicated than that, much more complex rather than a specific frequency.
Yeah.
I know I was talking about rife therapy earlier, where he uses specific frequencies to
Mhm.
shatter these viruses. But then how do we know, if we haven't got a microscope, how do we know what frequency we might need
Yeah.
or what frequency is good or bad for us? This is where it gets a little bit
Mhm.
confusing to me. So the experience of having all these bowls was fascinating.
Mhm.
I think going back to the tuning forks, it's the same thing. You could have a tuning fork, which is, what's this one? 528, the frequency of God. But probably what's more interesting is, don't know if you can hear that, but the two frequencies together and the interval which is created by that. So you have
It's like the
a,
third frequency that becomes created.
say again, sorry?
It's like a third frequency that comes created by the two.
Yes. And it's a relationship,
Mm.
which is a little bit like what I was saying earlier with the sound healing being an interaction. More interesting things happen when you have a relationship between two things rather than one thing,
Mm.
which we could talk about the famous 440, 432 argument, within music, that somehow 432 is better
Yeah.
because of the mathematics involved,
Mm.
which I understand, it's a purer mathematical idea, 432. You think you've talked about that a little bit with Steve Headflux?
It's something that I've been exploring by reading Steve Young's book and
Ah,
going on.
yes, I don't have that yet.
That's a great book. He's also got a course online where you can subscribe, and he's got about 20 hours of teaching, which is fascinating. One of the, I mean, so I'm slightly drawn to people who are working in those areas, those explorative kind of creative people. I'm also
Mhm.
intrigued by this idea that there's the Pythagorean comma,
Yeah, yeah.
which is this numerical musical anomaly that nobody's
Mhm.
actually ever managed to come up with this. I'm quite interested that there could be a pure mathematical way to resolve it rather than accepting this one anomaly that we're all conventionally hooked to.
Yes.
So I'm partly interested in that whole thing, and I follow a few people, but I don't. It's a wormhole that I don't.
Deep
I
wormhole.
will look around the edges, have some interesting chats, and figure out what the takeaway is.
Yes.
For me, music has always excited me. I remember getting in a trance state when I was a kid at a school, first school disco, and dancing to loud music and having this like in heightened state and going, oh, I didn't know quite what it was, but I was like, wow, loud music, dancing. There's something amazing about this. And so I've always been into dance music and dancing. And I like, there'll be times when I'm out dancing and suddenly I'm cutting moves and I go, I don't even know where those moves are coming from. So I think that's like connecting with like, I think a lot of the power of sound that's in our DNA from future past generations, past experiences, is a beautiful mystical thing. And so in some ways I don't want to know. It's a bit like I like things to remain magical. Sometimes I love the fact that I've got lots of records. I can put a needle on a record, but it still blows my mind that this needle on
Mhm.
on some vinyl creates what comes out of the speakers. And I kind of almost don't want to know about the magic or the technicalities of how it works. I know some people are really drawn to that, but I just quite like
Yes. I
something
like both.
really magical.
I think it's good to do both. Personally, I like embracing the mystery of
Yeah.
the music and how and understanding how powerful it is. But there is definitely a part of me which wants to understand it. Um, but it's probably too complex for us to understand anyway. The relationship with our relationship with music, and this is what I'm kind of getting at about the simplification of breaking things down to certain frequencies. It's like it's probably much more complicated than that, and it's a very human um, idea that we can try and understand things. And oh, it's this, that's the thing that causes the thing,
Yeah.
but it's inevitably much more complicated than that. And even as I say, the 432 thing, I'm fascinated by it, but I also think that music in other
Mm.
uh, frequencies is just as valid. I don't think that one's more special than the other necessarily. And sometimes the devil's in the detail, or that there's it's the bits in between which are more interesting. I love the maths of the 432, but I also love other music and still find um, modern classical music beautiful, even though it's in equal temperament, which is
Well, for
a smudging of the maths.
me, that starts to get more into the magic of music, i.e., I mean, a lot of my favorite music, if I go to a gig or when I hear interviews with the people that have created it, quite often they talk about they're channeling something. You know, they've got their ego out of the way. They don't know quite how they created something, or there's four or five of them on stage who've learned their craft. They've learned loads of ways to play music, but then actually in the moment, there's stuff happening that they just cannot figure out.
Yeah.
And so there's always this amazing thing when you see some musicians and they're just in the zone. They're looking at each other. They're loving playing. They don't know quite how what's coming out. Um, uh,
That is the beauty of music. I think it's
yeah,
such a powerful thing. I think it's probably the most powerful thing
yeah,
because of that ability to change our state,
yeah,
to make you dance, to make you meditate, to change your mood, to affect your emotions. And I think its power is that it does take us outside of the mind. It's not something you think about. Is something that's happening. And we mentioned the book earlier before we started,
right,
the
yeah,
mysticism book, I'll just show people the Inayat Khan book,
yeah, yeah,
which is based on the idea of music as God.
mm,
Um, Nada Brahma, Nada meaning sound or music, and Brahma meaning God. And I think this is a fundamental thing which music does. Ultimately, it can. It's like a music is like a miniature of the entire universe, and by practicing music, we're kind of tapping into this universal structure.
mm,
I'm quoting Michael Harrison now, who's another great musician that explores this kind of idea. So through music, we're tapping into the universal structure through our senses, through listening, through experiencing music. So it can take you to some amazing places and ultimately back to source.
yeah,
That's the idea of this book. Music just in its purity can take you back to source, which I think is a very powerful thing. Why do we love music? Why do I practice music like I do? Why am I obsessed by it? What does it do?
yeah,
And it's ultimately a spiritual remembering, I
yeah,
think. And that's the power of music. And that's why I find it so fascinating, all these different ideas around frequency music and how it affects us. Wonderful stuff.
It indeed is. And I think with 2 minutes left to go to this current recording, I think that seems a beautiful moment to kind of pause the interview.
Okay.
So I'm going to just press stop for a second and we will be back with part two in a minute.